The night the gates of Hollowmere House filled with flashing cameras and shouting voices, Maris knew the storm had finally broken. Reporters pushed against the fence, CPS stood ready to take the children, and one woman, Lila Vance, watched it all with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Everyone thought they knew the truth about this family. No one did. Not yet. But the next words out of Maris's mouth would decide if the children she loved would stay or be lost forever. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Maris Elwood had never thought much about the sound of a refrigerator humming until she started spending most of her evenings alone. In her little one-bedroom apartment in Dorchester, that low, steady noise seemed to fill the empty spaces. At 30, she'd gotten used to the quiet, too used to it maybe. Her days were spent at the Willow Cup, a cozy coffee shop wedged between a laundromat and a discount shoe store, pouring coffee for regulars who tipped in nickels and dimes. The work wasn't bad, but it wasn't steady either. Some weeks were flush with hours. Others had her scrambling to cover rent. She didn't talk much about her past, but it shaped the way she carried herself. Shoulders just a little guarded, eyes quick to measure a stranger. Growing up in foster homes had taught her that nothing stayed the same for long. You didn't unpack all your bags. You didn't count on promises. And you certainly didn't expect people to stick around once things got hard. That Friday morning, she was refilling the sugar jars when she overheard two customers at the counter. They were talking about the Crossford family, rich as royalty, the kind of folks whose house probably had its own name. The father, Nathaniel Crossford, had lost his wife a year ago in an accident, and now rumor had it no one could last more than a month as nanny for his 3 8-year-old sons. 9 had tried. 9 had failed. Maris kept her head down, pretending to polish the counter, but she listened. The women described the boys as impossible and wild, the sort who'd make a saint quit. Something in her tightened. She knew what it was to be a child no one seemed to understand. When the shop went quiet again, she leaned against the espresso machine, thinking about her thinning paycheck, and the landlord's latest reminder slipped under her door. The idea of applying for the job seemed ridiculous. She'd never done anything like it long term. But it was there, gnawing at her. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, phone in hand, staring at the Crossford family's ad. Her thumb hovered over the call button more than once before she finally pressed it. A polite voice scheduled an interview at Hollowmere House, the Crossfords' estate by the Charles River. She hung up, heart thudding. This could be the chance she'd been waiting for, or one more door that slammed before she could get her foot inside. The car eased to a stop at the base of a wide gravel drive, the tires crunching in the stillness. Hollowmere House rose ahead, its stone facade a deep, cool gray that seemed to drink in the pale afternoon light. The place had that imposing, old money presence you could feel in your chest, but what struck Maris most was the quiet. Not peaceful quiet, more like the hush of a church after everyone's gone home, a silence so complete it felt deliberate. The front door opened before she reached the porch. A tall man in a charcoal suit stood framed in the doorway, posture precise, expression polite but not welcoming. His eyes flicked over her quickly, like he was mentally timing how long she'd last. He stepped back to let her inside, and she crossed the threshold into a foyer of polished marble and shadow. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and something older, like books left too long on a shelf. There was no sound of children anywhere. No clatter of toys, no high-pitched laughter, not even the muffled thud of feet upstairs. Just the steady tick of a grandfather clock somewhere down the hall. Maris adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, her voice catching in her throat before she could introduce herself. She didn't have to. Footsteps sounded on the grand staircase, unhurried and measured. Nathaniel Crossford descended as if the house itself were watching. He was tall, with dark hair just beginning to gray at the temples, and a manner so composed it bordered on chilly. He extended his hand briefly. The shake was firm, businesslike, not meant to linger. "Ms. Elwood," he said, his voice even, almost formal. "Thank you for coming. I'll be straightforward. No one has stayed in this position for more than a month." It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a fact. As they walked deeper into the house, his words came in short, clipped sentences. I have 3 sons, Finn, Rowan, Calder. 8 years old. They lost their mother last year. Since then, they've rejected every adult who's tried to help. His jaw tightened slightly. I don't expect miracles. Just keep them safe. They stopped at a door near the end of the hall, the faint scent of paint seeping through the crack. Nathaniel pushed it open and stepped aside. They're in here. Maris stepped into a room that looked less like a playroom and more like a battlefield. Bold streaks of paint climbed one wall in uneven swaths, some still wet and glossy. An entire tower of blocks had been knocked over, the pieces scattered across a rug patterned with dinosaurs. A train set lay overturned in a tangle of tracks and plastic cars. Finn looked up first. His dark hair fell into his eyes, and there was a smirk there that didn't belong on an 8-year-old. So you're the new one, he said, the tone dripping with something between amusement and challenge. Rowan, seated cross-legged in the middle of the floor, offered a smile that almost looked sweet. Almost. Without breaking eye contact, he reached for a glass of water and tipped it just enough to send a cold splash down the front of her sweater. His smile didn't change. In the corner, half hidden behind an overturned chair, Calder was huddled with his knees pulled close, watching her as if she might suddenly lunge. His gaze was sharp but unreadable, and he didn't move. Maris took in the scene slowly, making sure her face didn't betray anything. Looks like you've been busy, she said, her tone deliberately even. No one answered. From behind her, Nathaniel cleared his throat. I'll leave you to get acquainted. His footsteps receded down the hall, and the room seemed to get even quieter. She crouched down and began picking up blocks, stacking them in a bin one by one. None of the boys moved to help. She could feel their eyes on her, assessing her in the same way the man at the door had. The silence wasn't awkward, it was calculated. A test. When the bin was full, she slid it against the wall and dusted off her hands. She turned toward the door, already aware she'd learned more in these few minutes than in any job interview. It was then she heard it, low but clear enough to catch. Finn's voice, pitched just above a whisper. She'll leave like the rest. Just wait. Maris froze mid-step. The words landed sharper than she expected. She glanced over her shoulder. Finn met her eyes without flinching, as if daring her to prove him wrong. She didn't answer. Out in the hallway, her footsteps felt loud against the marble. She could feel the weight of the house pressing in, its stillness, its history, its unspoken rules. She wasn't naive. This job was going to be hard, maybe impossible. But something in Finn's voice, that quiet certainty, it hooked her. It made her want to know what could put that kind of distrust into a child so young. Maris woke to the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen downstairs. The light in her small attic room was pale and watery, just beginning to slip in through the narrow window. It was her first morning on the job, and she felt that familiar mix of anticipation and tension she always got on day one of anything new. She'd promised herself she would keep her voice calm, her smile steady, no matter what came. The kitchen was bright and spacious, the kind of place meant for large family breakfasts. A long oak table ran down the center, and she could picture what it might have been like here a year ago. For chairs full, the air warm with chatter. Now, the space felt like it was holding its breath. She'd gotten up early to make something simple but comforting. Scrambled eggs, toast, sliced strawberries, and orange juice. The plates were ready when the boys filed in, each at their own pace. Finn came first, still in pajamas, hair sticking up in all directions. Rowan followed, eyes alert and calculating, while Calder trailed behind, head down, clutching the edge of his sweatshirt. Good morning, she said lightly. I hope you're hungry. They didn't answer. Finn slid into his chair, looked at his plate, and pushed it away with the back of his hand. I don't eat eggs, he muttered, not looking at her. Rowan sat across from Calder, an almost pleasant expression on his face as he reached for the spoon beside Calder's plate. In one smooth motion, he tucked it into his own lap. Calder glanced around, confused, his small hands patting the table. Where's my spoon? Calder asked, his voice tight. You probably lost it, Rowan said with a shrug. Maris leaned forward, her tone even. Rowan, give it back to him. Rowan tilted his head as if weighing her request, then slowly placed the spoon back on the table. Calder didn't touch his food. After a few moments, he pushed back his chair and left the kitchen without a word, his footsteps quick on the stairs. Maris stayed seated, hands resting on the edge of the table. The room felt heavier now, the smell of the food almost too strong. She'd been here before, not in this house, not with these boys, but in the moment itself. Her mind flashed back to one of her first foster homes, sitting at a long table while the woman in charge insisted she finish a plate of overcooked carrots. She remembered the starchy taste, the ache in her jaw from chewing, and the cold, silent punishment that followed when she refused. The memory made her throat tighten, but it also lit something in her. She wouldn't turn away from a child who felt cornered at a table. Not again. Nathaniel stepped into the kitchen then, phone in hand, brows drawn together. "I need to speak with you for a moment," he said, his voice low but firm. In the hall, he showed her an email from his company's PR department. The Beacon Herald, the very name carried the weight of trouble, had been making inquiries about his family. According to the message, they were hinting at a human interest piece on the widowed billionaire raising 3 sons alone. "I don't want any pictures, any quotes, anything they can twist," Nathaniel said. "Until this dies down, please avoid taking the boys out in public." The words were practical, but they landed differently on Maris. She'd only just started, and already she was being asked to keep herself and the boys out of sight. She nodded, but as she returned to the kitchen, she felt that subtle sting, like she'd been marked as an outsider in a house she was trying to make her place in. The rest of the day passed in careful steps. She learned where the art supplies were kept, how the back door latch stuck in the cold, and that Finn had a knack for disappearing whenever it was time to clean up. By evening, the sky outside the windows had turned the color of pewter, and the house had grown quiet. She was heading toward her room when she heard a muffled sound from down the hall, a soft, broken crying. It was coming from behind Calder's door. She paused, hand lifted to knock. Before she could, Finn appeared from the shadows of the hallway, his expression unreadable. "Don't bother," he said flatly. "Don't pretend you care. Nobody stays here long." The words hung in the air between them. Maris lowered her hand, watching him walk away. The door to Calder's room stayed closed, the quiet on the other side deeper than before. And in that moment, she understood just how high the walls were around these boys, and how much work it would take to climb them. The house had a different rhythm in the mornings, one that Maris was still getting used to. Instead of the hollow quiet she'd felt her first day, there was the faint clink of dishes somewhere in the distance, and the low hum of conversation. She followed the smells drifting through the hallway, yeast, butter, and something faintly sweet, until she stepped into the kitchen. A man stood at the counter, rolling dough with slow, deliberate movements. His frame was solid, his hair mostly silver, and his hands moved like they'd been doing this for decades. He didn't look up when he spoke. "You must be the new one." "Maris," she said, keeping her tone light. "And you are?" "Lucas Marin. Cook here for longer than I care to count." He glanced at her then, his gaze calm but assessing. "I've seen plenty of folks try this job. Most don't make it to the end of the month. Some don't even last the week." It wasn't cruel, just matter of fact, like he was telling her the forecast. That afternoon, after the boys had gone off in different directions, Maris wandered back into the playroom. The place still looked like it had been hit by a small storm, paint streaked in uneven swaths across the wall, a half-built Lego tower leaning like it might collapse at any second. She bent down and started gathering blocks into a bin, stacking books into a neat pile on the low shelf. "You're cleaning this up?" a voice asked from the doorway. She looked over her shoulder to see Lucas leaning against the frame, a kitchen towel slung over one shoulder. "Figured it might help," she said. "Most just step over it, figure it's not their job," he replied. "You didn't complain." "That's different." He left without another word, but there was no bite to his tone, just a hint of surprise. Later, with the sun lowering toward the horizon, Maris was sliding books back into place when she noticed one wouldn't sit flush against the shelf. She pulled it out and another shifted with it, revealing a small gap. Tucked in the space was a wooden box, its lid smooth from years of handling. She hesitated, fingers resting on it. It wasn't hers to open, but curiosity and something deeper, an instinct that this mattered, pushed her to lift the lid. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, made in crayon and pencil. Most showed a woman with long, flowing hair, holding hands with three smaller figures. The colors were bright, blue skies, green grass, sunlight spilling down. In several, they stood by the edge of a river. The water was always the same shade of deep blue, the kind a child uses when they've decided it's the only right color. She reached the last drawing and stilled. The same scene, mother and children by the river, but this time, a dark shape rushed in from the background. A car, sketched in bold, jagged lines, angled toward them as if it were moving fast. The crayon strokes were pressed hard into the paper, the kind of pressure that comes from trying to get something out that you don't want to hold inside. Her chest tightened. These weren't just memories of a mother. They were fragments of something traumatic. She'd seen it before in kids from the foster system. The way they draw what they couldn't say out loud. It hit her then that the boys might have actually been there, that they might have watched it happen. No wonder their walls were so high. She replaced the pictures gently, closing the lid just as a door shut somewhere down the hall. Nathaniel's voice carried faintly, low, clipped, and not pleased. She slid the box back into its hiding place before stepping into the hall. "I have to go into the city," Nathaniel said when she met him halfway down. His tie was already loosened, and there was a tension in his jaw she hadn't seen before. A few minutes later, she overheard him on the phone in the study. Words floated out between pauses, board meeting stock drop rumors. She didn't catch it all, but it was enough to guess that something about Crossford estates and holdings wasn't sitting well with the investors. It was after dark when he came back. Maris was in the den, the wooden box sitting beside her on the couch. She'd been turning over whether to tell him about it. When he walked in, she lifted one of the drawings slightly. "They've been drawing things like this," she began. "Do you?" He cut her off. "I'd rather you didn't dig into things with them." His voice was sharper than she'd heard before, not angry exactly, but edged with fatigue. "They've been through enough without rehashing the past." She lowered the picture slowly and set it back in the box. "Sometimes they want to talk about it, even if they don't know how." Nathaniel shook his head, already stepping back toward the doorway. "Not now." When he was gone, she sat for a moment in the dim light, the quiet of the room settling in around her. She tucked the box back onto the shelf, careful to return the books exactly as she'd found them. But the image stayed with her, the car, the river, the small hands holding onto their mother. Whatever had happened there was still alive in those boys, still shaping the way they looked at the world. If she was going to help them, and she wanted to, she'd have to stay long enough to find out what really happened. Maris first heard the name Lila Vance from Lucas, though the way he said it made it sound less like a person and more like a weather warning. "She's the kind who doesn't knock before she storms in," he told her one morning over coffee. "If she's got you in her sights, you'd better brace yourself." Lila Vance had a reputation in Boston media circles that reached far beyond the city limits. A senior reporter for the Beacon Herald, she'd earned the nickname, the Queen of Breaking News, for her knack of sniffing out stories before anyone else even knew they existed. Her talent was undeniable, but so was her taste for the sensational. Nathaniel had crossed paths with her once years back, when she'd pitched an exclusive on one of his corporate ventures. He declined, politely but firmly, telling her he preferred fact over theater. She had never forgotten the slight. Now, with the Crossford name appearing more frequently in the business pages for its recent market tremors, Lila saw an opportunity. She wasn't just after a business angle. This time, she wanted to get personal. Her first move was subtle. She started calling former staff at Hollowmere House, posing her questions like idle conversation, but steering them toward gossip. Over cups of coffee or phone lines with static, she gathered half-truths and colored them into sharper shades. Soon she had a handful of accounts about unruly triplets and a house no one wanted to work in. She didn't have a scandal yet, but she had a framework, and she knew how to build on it. The break came one crisp afternoon when Maris took the boys to Riverbend Park. It had been Nathaniel's suggestion to get them out for fresh air, though his tone carried a hint of resignation, as if he expected the outing to end in disaster. Riverbend was quiet that day, the river glinting silver under the pale sun, leaves scraping across the paths. Finn kicked at a stone with restless energy, while Rowan hung back, trailing a stick along the fence. Calder stayed close to Maris, his small hand brushing hers now and then. They'd just settled near the playground when Finn refused to share a ball with a younger kid. Maris knelt beside him, speaking firmly but without raising her voice. "You don't have to like sharing, but you do have to be fair." He turned away, shoulders stiff, muttering something she didn't quite catch. Across the park, behind a stand of bare-limbed trees, a camera shutter clicked. Lila had been watching from the moment they arrived. She framed the scene through her lens, waiting until Maris leaned closer to Finn, her mouth mid-sentence, his face turned away in defiance. Then snap. A moment frozen, stripped of its context, ready to be rewritten into something else. By the next morning, an email landed in Nathaniel's inbox from an untraceable address. No subject line, just a single sentence in the body. "Your nanny isn't who you think she is." Attached was the photograph, cropped tightly so it looked like Maris was leaning in, voice raised, while Finn flinched away. Nathaniel studied the image longer than he meant to. He knew photos could lie, but something about it, maybe the way Finn's face looked, hit an old nerve. When Maris walked into the study later that day, he closed his laptop a little too quickly. "I'd like you to keep the boys out of public places for a while," he said, avoiding her eyes. "At least until things settle down." She frowned. "Is this about the park yesterday?" "It's about avoiding trouble before it finds us," he replied. His tone was even, but the space between them felt wider than it had the day before. Maris nodded slowly, though inside her chest there was a mix of heat and hollow. She'd done nothing wrong, but the message was clear. She was becoming a liability. That evening, after the boys had gone to bed, she stayed in the kitchen longer than usual, drying dishes that didn't really need drying. Lucas was there, chopping herbs with the same unhurried precision he used for everything. "You've got that look," he said, without glancing up. "What look?" "The one people get when they realize this place isn't just about the kids. It's about the people circling them, waiting for a crack." He set down the knife, finally meeting her gaze. "The Beacon Herald doesn't let go once they bite. And Lila Vance." He shook his head. "She's the worst of them. If you plan to stick around, you'd better be ready for things to get ugly." Maris held his eyes, the weight of his words pressing into her. She thought of the boys, Finn's guarded defiance, Rowan's sly mischief, Calder's quiet watchfulness. Leaving now would be easier. But the easier path had never led her anywhere worth staying. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray, windless day when the air feels heavier than it should. Maris didn't see it right away. She was in the kitchen, pouring milk into 3 mismatched cereal bowls, when Lucas slid the folded newspaper across the counter without a word. The headline in the Beacon Herald seemed to leap off the page: "The mysterious nanny and the billionaire widower, who's really caring for the Crossford heirs." She read the opening lines, her stomach tightening with every sentence. Lila had taken the Riverbend Park photograph and stitched it into a story that dripped with suspicion. The piece implied Maris had ingratiated herself into Nathaniel's household for ulterior motives, hinting, without outright saying, that she might have her eye on more than just her paycheck. There were quotes from former household staff describing her as overly familiar with the children and strangely private about her life before Hollowmere. Lila had even dug up an old photo of Maris leaving a courthouse years ago, neglecting to mention she'd only been there as a witness in someone else's case. It was all cleverly worded, slippery enough to avoid legal trouble, but poisonous enough to stick. By mid-morning, the ripple effect was already underway. Nathaniel's phone didn't stop buzzing. Board members from Crossford estates were concerned about brand image and hinted that perhaps the safest move was to reset the domestic situation. Parents at the boys' private school whispered in the pickup line, glancing from Maris to their own children, as if she carried something contagious. By the end of the day, Finn had shoved another student who called her the gold digger babysitter. That evening, Nathaniel came home looking like he'd been carrying the weight of the city on his shoulders. He found Maris in the library, sorting through a stack of books Rowan had left scattered on the rug. "Maris," he began, his voice low but edged, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." She set the books aside, bracing herself. "All right. Is there anything in your past I should know about? Anything you've been keeping from me?" For a beat, she just stared at him. "You mean besides the fact that I survived the foster system, worked 2 jobs at a time since I was 16, and learned to keep my head down so people wouldn't assume the worst?" Her voice was steady, but she felt the heat rising under her skin. "If you're asking whether I've done something to hurt your kids, no, I haven't. And you already know that." Nathaniel looked away, jaw tight. "The article. The article is trash, Nathaniel. And if you believe that paper over the person who's here every single day with your sons, then maybe I don't belong here." The room went quiet. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the bare branches against the window. "I didn't say I believe it," he replied finally. "But I can't ignore the pressure I'm under. The boys need stability," she cut in. "Not another adult walking out on them because someone decided to sell a headline." Her chest hurt with the effort of keeping her voice from breaking. The unspoken truth was hanging between them. She could leave, and it might make his life easier in the short term. But it would gut the fragile trust she'd been building with those kids. She turned toward the hallway. "Maybe I should take a few days. Give everyone some space to think." By the time she reached the front door, her hands were trembling. She pulled on her coat, telling herself she'd walk out before she said something she couldn't take back. But when she turned, she saw them, Finn, Rowan, and Calder, standing halfway down the staircase. Finn's chin was tilted up in that stubborn way of his, but his eyes betrayed him. Rowan was gripping the banister, so hard his knuckles were white. Calder, half hidden behind his brothers, looked like a small shadow that might disappear if she blinked. They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. Maris exhaled, her hand still on the doorknob. She thought of the first time she'd walked into Hollowmere House, all marble and echo, and how she'd sworn to herself she wouldn't get attached. That promise had already been broken. She let go of the doorknob, shrugging off her coat. "I'm not going anywhere," she told him quietly. From somewhere deep in the house, the grandfather clock struck 8. Across town, Lila Vance was sliding into a booth at a dimly lit diner, flipping open her laptop. Her phone buzzed with a new message from an unlisted number. CPS opening investigation into Crossford household. Official notice coming. She smiled to herself, the screen's glow catching the edge of her lipstick. The game was just getting started. It was one of those brittle autumn afternoons where the sunlight came in sharp angles, making the school's brick walls seem almost too bright. Maris parked at the far end of the lot, giving herself a moment before heading in. She'd been trying to keep a lower profile since the article, but the thought of the boys walking out to find no one waiting was something she couldn't stomach. She spotted them through the playground fence, Finn and Rowan tossing a football back and forth while Calder trailed behind, kicking at the grass. Just as the dismissal bell rang, a knot of boys about Calder's age closed in on him near the bike racks. Maris couldn't hear everything from where she stood, but she caught the sneer in one kid's voice. "Your nanny's just here to get close to your dad. Everybody knows it." Calder froze, his shoulders stiffening. His small hands clenched at his sides, and Maris saw the faintest tremor in his jaw. She could have marched right over, demanded they stop, but something in her told her this was his moment to reclaim a piece of himself. So instead, she walked up slowly, came around to his side, and crouched until she was eye level with him. "Hey, Calder," she said, her tone calm but warm. "You ready to head home?" He blinked, glanced at her, then back at the boys. "Yeah," he muttered, and took a step closer. Without another word, she fell in step beside him, their pace matched. The other kids lost interest quickly. There's not much fun in teasing someone who walks away without giving you what you want. By the time they reached the car, Calder's breathing had evened out. He didn't say thank you, and she didn't expect him to. But when she opened the back door, he climbed in without hesitation and buckled up, the tiniest hint of relief in his posture. Later that evening, the kitchen smelled faintly of rosemary and roast chicken. Lucas was slicing bread at the counter, his sleeves rolled up, when Maris walked in. He didn't look up right away. "I heard about what happened at school," he said after a moment. "You handled it better than most." "I'm not sure I handled anything," she replied. "I just didn't want to make it worse." Lucas set the bread knife down and finally met her eyes. Sometimes standing next to someone quietly is more powerful than any defense you could mount. She wasn't sure if he was talking about Calder or about her. After a pause, he wiped his hands and leaned against the counter. "There's something else you should know. Nathaniel's brother, Elliot, sent a letter." Maris frowned. "Nathaniel has a brother? Haven't seen him in years." They had a falling out, some ugly business after their father died. But the letter, it wasn't just a family hello. He wants to meet the boys. "That's not so bad," she said slowly, though the hairs on her arms prickled. Lucas's expression didn't change. He also made it clear he's concerned about your influence, and that he's considering whether he should take a more active role in their lives. His exact words, "I'll be looking into whether it's in their best interest to be under Nathaniel's roof right now." Maris leaned back against the table, the weight of those words settling heavy in her chest. "So it's not just Lila and her circus. There's family who wouldn't mind seeing me out of the picture." "Family can be worse than the press," Lucas said quietly. "If CPS does get involved, a blood relative's opinion carries weight." The thought lodged like a stone in her throat. She'd been bracing herself for cameras, gossip, whispers at the school gates. But this was different. This was the kind of pressure that could rearrange the boys' lives overnight. And hers, too. When she left the kitchen, the house was already quiet. Nathaniel had taken a late call in his office. The boys were upstairs, and the hallway lights were dimmed. Maris reached the front door to double-check the lock when she noticed it. A plain manila envelope sitting squarely on the welcome mat. No name, no return address. She bent down, half expecting junk mail or a flyer. But it was heavier than that, the paper inside sliding with a muted sound. She closed the door, flicked on the entryway light, and slid a finger under the flap. The breath caught in her throat as she pulled out the contents. Photocopied pages from her foster care file. Full name, case number, every address she'd ever been moved to. And there, in bold black letters, the note from a caseworker 20 years ago. Subject exhibits difficulty trusting adults due to repeated placement disruptions. She hadn't shown those files to anyone at Hollowmere. Hadn't even spoken about them in years. Someone had gone looking, and someone wanted her to know they'd found it. The clock in the hallway ticked on, steady and loud, as she stood there, envelope in hand. Whoever had delivered had done more than dig into her past. They'd just put her on notice. The envelope had been sitting on her nightstand all night, unopened since she first glimpsed its contents. But by morning, there was no avoiding it. Maris sat cross-legged on the edge of her bed, the thin stack of photocopies in her lap. Every page carried the stale, bureaucratic smell of files that had sat too long in some dusty cabinet. There it was, her life in black and white. Names of foster homes she'd barely stayed in long enough to memorize, terse notes from social workers, the cold shorthand of people too busy to remember she was a person. Then came the one that made her chest tighten. Incident report, age 15. Subject fled placement. Recovered by local police. Placement terminated. She didn't need to read the rest. She could still feel the summer night air rushing past her as she'd run barefoot down the street, her small backpack bouncing against her spine, the muffled sound of her foster mother's voice yelling threats behind her. That was the night she decided she'd rather face the unknown than one more day under that roof. Now, someone had dug it all up, dragged the worst moments of her life into the light, and placed it right at her door. And she knew exactly why, to make Nathaniel wonder what else she'd been hiding. She found him in his study, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. Papers were spread across his desk, but he wasn't reading any of them. When she stepped inside, his eyes flicked to her, unreadable. "I assume you've seen it," he said. "I have," she answered. Her voice felt steadier than she expected. He tapped a finger on the desk. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it's mine," she said simply. "And because it has nothing to do with the boys." "I need to hear it from you, Maris. All of it." So she told him. About the family that smiled in front of neighbors, but froze her out the second the door closed. About the name she was called, the way her schoolwork would go missing and she'd be blamed. About the night she decided she wouldn't survive if she stayed. When she finished, Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. "I believe you," he said at last. "But if this surfaces, if Lila or anyone else spins it, CPS won't care about your reasons. All they'll see is a runaway with a history." "I know. That's why," he hesitated, then exhaled. "I think you should consider leaving Hollowmere, at least until this investigation blows over. If you're gone, the boys aren't a target. They can't twist this into something worse." The words landed heavier than she expected, though part of her had known this conversation was coming. "You're asking me to disappear," she said quietly. "I'm asking you to protect them," he replied. "Sometimes that means stepping away." She walked to the window, staring at the gray sweep of the river. Her mind reeled with both options. Walk away now and maybe shield the boys from more gossip, or stay and risk dragging them into the heart of a very public fight. "Do you know what it's like," she said finally, "to have every place you land yanked out from under you? To have every home turn into just another stop on the way to somewhere else?" His silence was answer enough. She turned back to him. "I'm not leaving. Not unless you tell me to my face that you want me gone." "I'm telling you I'm worried," he said. "I'm worried too. But I'm not walking away from them. Not now." He didn't argue further, but the tightness in his jaw told her he hadn't changed his mind. That night, she sat in the dimly lit kitchen long after everyone else had gone to bed, fingers curled around a mug she didn't drink from. She knew her choice meant she'd be standing in the middle of the storm when it hit. But she also knew that if she left, it would be another wound for 3 boys who'd already lost too much. Her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, expecting a message from a friend or maybe a news alert. Instead, the screen showed a screenshot from social media, Lila Vance's verified profile. The post was short, but its weight was immediate. "An old story is coming back, and it's going to bring down a family." The black sedan rolled up the gravel drive just after 9 in the morning. Maris was on her way from the kitchen with a tray of breakfast dishes when she saw the 2 women step out, both in dark coats, with folders tucked under their arms. Their polite but unreadable expressions made her chest tighten. They introduced themselves in the foyer, crisp voices cutting through the stillness. "We're with the Department of Children and Family Services," the taller one said. "We're here to conduct a full home assessment." Nathaniel came down the stairs a moment later, his hand sliding into his pocket like he was trying to anchor himself. "I wasn't told this would happen today," he said. The shorter woman gave him a small, rehearsed smile. "That's the point. We need to observe things as they are." The words hung in the air like a draft through a cracked window. Maris stood at the edge of the foyer, unsure whether to step forward or fade into the background. She knew this was more than an inconvenience. In a case like this, her past, her years in foster care, that runaway report, could become ammunition for anyone who wanted her out of the picture. And she could already imagine how Lila Vance would use it if she got her hands on the file. The day unfolded in slow motion. The inspectors moved through the house, jotting notes, opening doors, speaking softly with the boys. Nathaniel trailed them like a shadow, trying to keep his voice calm, but betraying himself in the way his shoulders stayed rigid. By afternoon, the ripple of tension had reached the children. Finn stormed out of his room when he overheard one of the women mention care arrangements. His voice cracked with fury as he slammed his fists on the table in the schoolroom, sending books sliding to the floor. "They can't make us leave," he shouted. Rowan didn't speak at all. He stayed by the window, peering through the curtains every few minutes, like he was watching for someone or something he feared might appear. Calder clung to Maris, his small hands gripping the fabric of her sweater every time one of the inspectors passed by. She kept her voice soft, telling him it was okay, but his eyes stayed wide and wary. That night, after the inspectors left, the house felt hollow. Nathaniel sat in the study with a glass of something amber, staring at a closed laptop as though it might reopen with better news. Maris knocked softly on the doorframe. "Do you want me to check on the boys?" she asked. He didn't look at her. "They're fine." She stepped inside, unsure if she was intruding. "Nathaniel, they're scared. They need to know." He cut her off, his voice sharper than she'd heard it in weeks. "If you hadn't come into this house, maybe we wouldn't be here right now." The words stopped her mid-step. She felt them more than heard them, like an icy hand closing around her ribs. It was the kind of sentence that played straight into the oldest fear she carried, that she was the problem, that every place she touched eventually cracked. She wanted to say it wasn't fair, that Lila had been circling long before she arrived. But the fight left her before it reached her lips. Instead, she turned away, swallowing the knot in her throat. The house was dark when Lucas found her in the kitchen, rinsing a cup she didn't remember pouring. He didn't waste words. From the pocket of his apron, he slid a small photograph onto the counter. It was old, edges curled, the colors faded to a muted wash. Nathaniel stood on a grassy bank by the Charles River, his arm around a woman Maris didn't recognize. She was laughing, head tipped toward him, one hand holding his wrist like she never wanted to let go. Maris glanced up at Lucas, waiting for an explanation. "This," Lucas said quietly, "is what Lila has. She's been holding on to it, waiting for the right moment." "Who is she?" Maris asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head. "I don't know. But Lila thinks it matters. And she's not going to stop until everything blows wide open." Maris looked back at the photo, her stomach sinking. The river in the background seemed to shimmer with something ominous, as if the past was already spilling into the present, unstoppable. And she wondered not just if she could protect the boys, but whether she even knew the whole truth about the man she was trying to protect them from losing. Maris didn't wait until morning. She went straight to Nathaniel's study, the photograph clutched so tightly in her hand that the edges bent. The corridor outside was silent, but inside the study, the warm glow of a desk lamp fell across stacks of paperwork and a crystal tumbler half filled with untouched whiskey. Nathaniel sat there, sleeves rolled up, staring at a ledger like he'd been pretending to work. She stepped in, her voice even but sharp. "Who is she?" She laid the photograph on the desk, the image face up. Nathaniel's eyes flickered to it. For a few seconds, he said nothing, the silence stretching until it felt deliberate. Then he leaned back, his gaze on the photo, as though it was a door to somewhere he didn't want to go. "Her name is Helena Voss." The name meant nothing to Maris until he added, she was a journalist. And Lila Vance's half-sister. Maris blinked, her breath catching. "Lila's sister?" "Same mother," Nathaniel said, his voice low. "Different fathers. I met Helena almost a decade ago. She came here saying she wanted to do a human interest profile on Crossford estates. At first, she was polite, professional. Elise, my wife, never trusted her. She thought Helena's interest went beyond the company." Maris sat down slowly. "Beyond the company, how?" She asked questions that didn't belong in any business interview, Nathaniel said, his jaw tightening. "About our marriage. Elise's medical history. The boys' routines. Elise was certain she was digging for something to hurt us. I thought she was overreacting. I wish I'd listened." The way his voice softened on that last line made Maris's chest tighten. "The day before the accident," he continued, "Helena showed up unannounced. We talked for maybe 15 minutes. She told me she had unfinished business and wanted to see me again. The next afternoon, he trailed off, the rest swallowed by the weight of the memory. Maris didn't need him to finish. She remembered the boys' drawing she'd found, the riverbank, a woman holding their hands, and behind them, the shadow of a car. She died in that crash? Maris asked. Nathaniel gave a single, pained nod. Lila believes, no, she's convinced, that we had something to do with it. I never told anyone Helena had been here right before it happened. It would have fueled speculation, and the boys had already lost enough. Maris stared at the photograph. So now she's aiming at me, because she can't hit you directly. She's aiming at the person she thinks I'll protect the most, Nathaniel said. And you have a past she can twist. You've got no public voice, no PR team. To her, you're an easy target. The words stung because they were true. Maris had lived through the system long enough to know how a case file could be turned into a weapon, strip away the context, and the truth became irrelevant. This isn't just about you keeping your job, Nathaniel added, his eyes locking on hers. It's about the boys. Lila wants to hurt me, and the fastest way is to make them feel unsafe here. Maris leaned back, feeling the edges of the chair press into her shoulders. She could walk away now, save herself from the storm. But then she thought of Calder's tiny hands gripping her sweater after nightmare, Rowan's watchful eyes that didn't miss a thing, Finn's defiance that was really just fear in armor. If she left, they'd see it as proof that everyone eventually walks away. If I go, she said slowly, she wins. And the boys will think I left because she was right about me. That's not the kind of wound you heal from. Nathaniel's expression shifted, conflict, fear, something that looked almost like trust. You want to protect them? She asked. His answer was barely a nod. Then let me stand with you, she said. Because if I walk out that door, all they'll remember is that once again, someone they trusted decided they weren't worth staying for. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The study felt smaller, as though the walls themselves were leaning in to hear what would be said next. Outside, wind rattled the bare branches against the windows in a steady rhythm, like a knock that wouldn't stop. Nathaniel finally broke the silence. If we do this, Maris, it won't be easy. Lila will keep coming. She'll try to dig up everything about you, about me, even about Elise. I'm not afraid of her, Maris said, though in truth she was. But fear didn't outweigh the certainty in her gut. What I am afraid of is what happens to the boys if they think they're alone in this. Nathaniel looked down at the photograph one last time before sliding it back into the desk drawer, as though shutting away more than just an image. Then we stand together. Maris gave a single nod. It wasn't a truce. It was a line drawn. Maris sat at the long dining table, her fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. Nathaniel was standing at the head of the table, pacing like the polished floorboards might give him answers if he wore them down enough. The weight of the past weeks hung between them, accusations, photographs twisted into lies, whispers that turned into headlines. She took a slow breath. We can't keep doing this. Nathaniel stopped pacing, but didn't turn around. Doing what? Hiding, she said, letting her frame the narrative. Lila gets to say whatever she wants because we're too busy putting out fires to speak for ourselves. He finally faced her, his expression guarded. You think a press conference is going to make this better? The moment we open our mouths, CPS will be all over it. Anything we say, anything, can be pulled out of context and used against us. Maris leaned forward. I'm not talking about some defensive statement. I'm talking about telling the truth, our truth. On our terms. If we keep staying silent, the only story people hear is hers. And right now, she's painting me as a manipulative stranger and you as a negligent father. That's not who we are, and it's not what those boys see when they look at us. Nathaniel rubbed his jaw, the tension there visible even from across the table. You want the boys involved in this? They're already involved, Maris said. Every whisper at school, every parent's sideways glance, every time they see us tense up when the phone rings, they feel it. We're not protecting them by pretending none of this is happening. If we give them the chance to stand with us, to see that we're not ashamed, maybe it gives them some power back. Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window, staring out at the skeletal branches swaying in the winter wind. You're asking me to gamble with everything. Not just my reputation, my custody of them. I'm asking you to stop letting her write our story, Maris said softly. We've already lost too much by staying quiet. Silence stretched until she thought he was going to refuse outright. Then he exhaled long and slow. If we do this, we need more than just our words. We need proof. It was Lucas's voice from the doorway that broke in. I might have something. Both of them turned to see the chef standing there, his ever-present apron still dusted with flour. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I kept the camera footage from the day Helena came here, he said. Didn't delete it when I swapped out the security system a year later. Don't know why, just had a feeling I should keep it. Nathaniel straightened. You're saying you have video? Lucas nodded. Shows her walking out the front gates, getting into her car. Alone. No one following. No confrontation. She was alive and unharmed when she left here. That's not speculation, it's recorded fact. Maris felt a rush of relief, so strong it was almost dizzying. Lucas, that's everything. If we have that, she can't keep implying you or the boys had anything to do with her death. Don't be too sure, Lucas said grimly. Lila's good at twisting things. But at least this puts us back on level ground. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair. We'll need someone we can trust to share it with. I have a contact, Maris said. Old colleague from my days at the shelter, before here. She's a reporter at the Boston Chronicle now. Her work is human-centered, no sensationalism, no cheap shots. If anyone will tell the story honestly, it's her. Nathaniel hesitated, still torn between caution and the growing sense that retreat wasn't an option anymore. Finally, he gave a single nod. Set it up. But we do it on our terms. No one comes here without clearance. No one talks to the boys unless we're present. Maris's pulse quickened, not with fear this time, but with resolve. For the first time since Lila's campaign began, she felt like they weren't just waiting for the next blow. They were finally moving toward something. As Lucas left to retrieve the footage, Maris lingered at the table, pulling out her phone. She composed a message to her Chronicle contact, explaining the basics, asking for a meeting. Before she could hit send, her phone buzzed with a new notification, an unknown number. The message was short. No name, no greeting. You won't live long enough to tell that story. Maris stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the delete button. The letters burned into her vision, not because of the threat itself. She'd dealt with intimidation before, but because of what it implied. This wasn't just a smear campaign anymore. Someone was willing to make it personal. When Nathaniel came back into the room, he saw her face and stopped cold. What happened? She slipped the phone into her pocket. Nothing we can't handle, she said. But inside, the decision she'd just made settled in like stone. They were going to tell the truth. And they were going to do it before anyone had the chance to silence her. Maris sat in the corner booth of the small cafe across from the Beacon Herald's brick-front building, her coat still damp from the sleet outside. She'd chosen this place deliberately, not too crowded, but public enough to keep things from turning into a shouting match. Her hands rested on the table, fingertips grazing the flash drive she'd brought. The door swung open with a rush of cold air, and Lila Vance stepped inside, sunglasses still on despite the gray winter sky. You wanted this face-to-face, Lila said, sliding into the seat across from her without removing her coat. So talk. Maris didn't waste time. She pushed the flash drive toward her. It's the security footage from the day Helena left Hollowmere House. It shows her walking out unharmed, alone. No one followed her. Whatever story you've been telling yourself about Nathaniel or the boys, this proves it isn't true. Lila didn't touch the drive. Her lips curled in something between a sneer and a smile. You think a few seconds of video erases everything? You think it changes the fact that Nathaniel ruined her career, humiliated her publicly, and left her with nothing? My sister died a week later. You can't tell me those things aren't connected. Maris kept her voice even. I'm sorry for your loss. I mean that. But you're using that grief as a weapon, and you're hurting people who had nothing to do with what happened. Lila leaned forward, voice dropping to a razor's edge. Your sympathy means nothing to me. I'm not after you because I think you matter. I'm after you because he trusts you. When you fall, he falls harder. Maris met her stare and held it. That's the difference between us. You want to tear people down to feel whole again. I want to keep those kids from losing anyone else they love. For a moment, Lila's jaw tightened, and Maris thought she might say more. Instead, Lila stood abruptly, snatching the flash drive off the table. We'll see who's left standing, she said and walked out. That afternoon, the final CPS home evaluation began. Nathaniel had made sure the house was spotless, the boys dressed neatly, the kitchen stocked with fresh-baked bread from Lucas. But just as the two CPS workers were checking their clipboards by the living room fireplace, The front door opened again, this time to the snap of a camera shutter. Lila strode in with a man carrying a telephoto lens, her heels clicking against the marble. "Don't mind us," she said with mock cheer. "Just documenting a day in the life." Finn was the first to react. "Get out," he shouted, his small hands clenched into fists. Rowan's voice followed, sharper than Maris had ever heard. "You can't just come in here." Calder grabbed Maris's arm, eyes wide, his lower lip trembling. Nathaniel moved fast, stepping between Lila and the boys, his voice tight with fury. "You're trespassing. Leave now." The photographer kept snapping, the shutter sound loud and invasive. Lila only tilted her head, like she was waiting for someone to lose control. Maris felt Calder's grip tighten. Something in her broke then, not with anger, but with the sharp, protective instinct that had carried her through every ugly chapter of her own past. She walked forward, planting herself directly in front of the boys and the camera. Her voice was steady, but each word carried steel. "These children have lost enough. They are not props for your story, and they are not for sale. Whatever you think you're exposing, it ends here." The room went still, except for the faint scratching of a CPS pen on paper. One of the workers cleared her throat. "I'm going to have to ask everyone to calm down," she said, glancing between Maris, Nathaniel, and Lila. "We'll be reviewing both today's events and any related media as part of our assessment." Lila smirked at that, but she backed toward the door. "You can't control what's already out there," she said. Nathaniel didn't answer. His jaw was so tight Maris thought it might crack. When the door finally closed behind Lila and her photographer, the boys' breathing slowly began to steady. The CPS workers gathered their notes, giving polite but distant farewells. "We'll be in touch once we've completed our review," one of them said, tucking her folder under her arm. Maris followed them to the entryway, offering a stiff nod. That was when she noticed it, a quick, almost invisible motion. The taller CPS worker slipped a plain white envelope into Lila's hand before stepping outside. Lila's fingers closed over it without looking. Maris froze, watching as Lila slid the envelope into her bag. She didn't know what was inside, but the cold weight in her stomach told her it wasn't good. This wasn't just about rumors and bad press anymore. It was a game played in shadows, with pieces moving where no one could see. When she turned back toward the living room, Nathaniel was still standing in the same place, his hand resting on the back of the couch like he needed it to stay upright. The boys were huddled together on the rug, Calder's head resting on Rowan's shoulder. Everything in her wanted to promise them it would be okay. But looking at that closed front door and remembering the envelope, Maris knew the truth. This fight was nowhere near over. Maris didn't sleep that night. The image of the plain white envelope slipping into Lila's hand replayed over and over, like a loop she couldn't turn off. By dawn, she decided if she didn't find out what was inside, she'd be fighting blind. When she saw Lila leaving Hollowmere House later that morning, she grabbed her coat and slipped out through the back gate, keeping far enough behind to avoid notice. Lila's black sedan rolled into the circular drive of the Hawthorne Hotel, the kind of place that smelled like polished wood and whispered money. Maris ducked into a coffee shop across the street and pulled out her phone. "Lucas," she said when he answered, "I need a favor. Can you find out what's in the envelope she got from that CPS worker?" Lucas didn't ask why. He never did. "Give me an hour," he said, then hung up. It was less than 40 minutes before her phone buzzed again. "Got it," Lucas said quietly. "It's a draft CPS report, an internal one, not the sanitized version in the official file. It's got personal details about you they didn't use. The kind of details someone could twist if they wanted to." Her stomach dropped. "What kind of details?" "Things about your foster record," he said. "Stuff that's not relevant to your work here, but if it got out, it'd be ugly. And it's clear Lila wasn't supposed to have it." Maris closed her eyes for a moment, letting the reality settle like cold stone in her chest. "Thank you, Lucas." She hung up, then stood and walked straight toward the hotel. She didn't bother with the front desk. A bellhop was pushing a luggage cart toward the elevator when she stepped in behind him, pressing the button for the top floor. The hallway smelled faintly of perfume and old carpet. Room 1206 had the door cracked, just enough for her to hear the muffled voice inside. She knocked. Lila opened the door, eyebrows lifting in surprise before sharpening into a smirk. "You must have a death wish." Maris pushed the door the rest of the way open and stepped inside. "I'm here to tell you to stop." Lila laughed, a brittle sound. "Stop? Do you have any idea what you're asking? You think you can just waltz in and tell me to drop the only leverage I have?" "This isn't leverage," Maris said evenly. "It's cruelty. You have proof Nathaniel isn't guilty of what you've been saying, and you're still trying to destroy him. For what? So you can feel like Helena's death wasn't meaningless." Lila's expression hardened. "You don't get to say her name. You think you can take her place in those boys' lives? You're a hired hand with a tragic backstory, nothing more. I'm doing this for her, for justice." "Justice." Maris stepped closer, her voice steady. "Justice doesn't come from burning children's lives to the ground. They've already lost their mother. You want to make them lose their home too? That's not justice. That's vengeance." For a moment, Lila didn't speak. Her gaze flickered, and Maris knew she'd hit something raw. But then Lila shook her head. "You don't know what it's like to watch someone you love crumble and die while the people who hurt them walk away untouched." Maris swallowed, her voice dropping. "Actually, I do." The silence between them stretched taut. Maris slipped her hand into her coat pocket, feeling the reassuring weight of her phone. She'd hit record the moment Lila started talking. And Lila kept going. "Fine. I know Nathaniel didn't cause her accident, but he ruined her all the same. That's enough for me." It was exactly what Maris needed. Lila admitting she knew the truth, but wanted to hurt him anyway. Maris let her keep talking until the tone in her voice shifted to suspicion. "You can leave now," Lila said sharply. Maris walked out without looking back, the recording safely saved. She didn't feel triumphant, just exhausted, but with the sharp edge of resolve cutting through the fatigue. This was her last card to play, and she knew it had to be used wisely. By the time she reached Hollowmere House, the winter afternoon had sunk into a bleak gray. She noticed the press vans first, 3 of them lined up along the drive, satellite dishes aimed at the sky. Cameras swiveled toward her as she stepped through the gates, their flashes popping in the gloom. Her pulse quickened. Over the cluster of reporters, she caught sight of a woman in a navy coat striding toward the front steps. The CPS badge clipped to her lapel glinted in the fading light. Her face was all business, but her walk was urgent. Nathaniel was standing at the door, blocking the way. Maris heard just enough to understand. "We've received instructions to begin temporary placement proceedings," the CPS worker said. The world seemed to tilt, her breath catching in her throat. Temporary placement. That meant taking the boys, today. Whatever game Lila was playing, it had just escalated beyond bad press and ugly rumors. Now it was about to rip 3 children from the only home they had left. The air outside Hollowmere House felt like it had been cut from ice. Reporters crowded the gate, shouting questions, their voices blurring into a single, hungry noise. Maris could barely hear over it until the words from the CPS worker hit her like a brick. "We're requesting that Mr. Crossford and Ms. Hale sign a temporary transfer of guardianship," the woman said. Her tone was calm, professional, like she was talking about something as simple as a change of address. "The children will be placed in foster care until our investigation is complete." Finn's voice ripped through the cold. "Don't let them take us." His fists were clenched, his face red with panic. Rowan stood frozen beside him, eyes darting between Nathaniel and the CPS worker. Calder's hand was wrapped so tight around Maris's coat that she could feel her ribs strain under the grip. Nathaniel's jaw was set, so hard she thought it might crack. He glanced at her, eyes sharp, desperate. "We can fight this," he muttered under his breath. But even he didn't sound certain. Something inside Maris shifted, part fear, part resolve, part the aching memory of being 15 and watching strangers decide her fate in a room that smelled like stale coffee. She couldn't let it happen to them. Not here. Not in front of a swarm of cameras, waiting to devour the moment. She stepped forward, planting herself between the CPS workers and the boys. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying over the chaos. Before you take another step, everyone needs to hear this. Nathaniel's eyes widened as she pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over the play button. She didn't give herself time to second guess. The recording filled the air, Lila's voice, sharp and unmistakable. "I know Nathaniel didn't cause Helena's accident," it said. "But he ruined her all the same. That's enough for me." There was a ripple through the crowd, the kind that changes the energy of a place in an instant. Murmurs rose from the reporters. A few of them had already raised their cameras higher, catching every word. One man in a gray scarf shouted toward Lila, "Is this your voice? Did you know the truth and still try to frame them?" Lila, standing off to the side with her photographer, went pale but kept her chin high. "That's taken out of context," she said quickly. "You don't know the whole story." "Oh, I think we do," another reporter called out, closing in. The CPS worker hesitated, looking from Maris to Nathaniel, then to the growing knot of press. "We need to pause this process," she said, her professional calm now tinged with caution. "The department will review the recording before proceeding." Lila's composure cracked. She turned and pushed past the photographers, ignoring the barrage of questions. The cameras followed her retreat, their lenses hungry for every sign of defeat. For a second, everything was still. Then Nathaniel stepped forward, closing the space between him and Maris. He took her hand in his, not like an afterthought, but as if he'd been meaning to do it for a long time. His voice was steady, but carried enough to be heard over the crowd. "She's not just the boy's caretaker. She's family." The words hit Maris harder than she expected. She'd heard plenty of assurances in her life, but this was different. This was public. This was him planting a flag. The CPS team conferred quietly, then stepped back toward their vehicle. The boys didn't move until the car pulled away. Finn let out a sharp breath and muttered, "Good." Rowan slid his hands into his pockets, his shoulders loosening a little. Calder didn't let go of Maris, not even then. The reporters didn't leave right away, they never did, but the frenzy had shifted. Questions were now aimed at the CPS department, at Lila's credibility, at the validity of the investigation itself. Lucas stood near the gate, catching her eye. He gave her the faintest nod, like a silent acknowledgement. "You did it." As the crowd began to thin, Nathaniel turned to her. "You realize you just threw yourself into the fire," he said, though his voice held more gratitude than reprimand. "I was already in it," Maris replied. "At least now we're not standing in it alone." For the first time since she'd arrived at Hollowmere House, she didn't feel like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She didn't feel like a temporary fixture in someone else's story. The road ahead would still be rough, she knew that, but the ground under her feet felt different now. Solid. Claimed. She glanced at the boys, now talking quietly to each other, their voices finally free from the strain of panic. She could picture staying here, without the constant shadow of leaving. The news from CPS arrived on a Tuesday morning, the kind of day where the air was clear enough to see the frost still clinging to the grass in the front yard. Nathaniel and Maris sat side by side at the long dining table, the boys hovering nearby, pretending to color, but clearly listening to every word. The CPS caseworker spoke evenly, flipping through a thick file before setting it down. After reviewing all submitted evidence, including the recent recording and corroborating witness statements, we have determined that the environment at Hollowmere House is safe and appropriate for continued placement of the children with their father and Ms. Hale. Finn's pencil slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Calder let out a breath, so deep it sounded like he'd been holding it for weeks. Rowan didn't say anything, he just closed his sketchbook quietly, like he'd just finished the last page of a long, difficult chapter. The caseworker went on. The report also notes Ms. Hale's role in the children's emotional recovery as a significant stabilizing factor. That's reflected in our final recommendations. She gave a brief, almost rare smile before leaving them with copies of the official report. The moment the front door shut, Finn bolted to Maris and hugged her so tight she had to steady herself. Calder followed, clutching her arm, and Rowan, in his quiet way, lingered close enough for her to feel his presence. Nathaniel was still sitting, staring at the document like it might dissolve if he blinked too fast. "It's over," he said finally. his voice somewhere between relief and disbelief. "We keep them. They stay here." But outside these walls, the storm had turned on someone else. The recording of Lila's confession had made its way beyond the local press, gaining traction on national outlets and social media. The outrage wasn't just about her vendetta. It was about her willingness to use children to fuel it. The hashtag calling for her removal from the Beacon Herald trended for 3 days straight. By the end of the week, the paper issued a formal statement, an apology to the Crossford family, and an announcement that Lila Vance had been suspended indefinitely. In quieter corners of the newsroom, whispers suggested she wouldn't be coming back at all. Maris didn't celebrate. She knew enough about loss to understand that public humiliation wasn't the same as closure. That truth landed at her doorstep in the form of a plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Lila's handwriting neat but sharp. "You won, but my wound will never heal." Maris read it twice, then tucked it away in a drawer she rarely opened. Some things didn't need to be left where you'd see them every day. Later that evening, after the boys had gone upstairs, Nathaniel joined her in the kitchen. The only light came from the small lamp over the counter, casting the space in a warm, honeyed glow. "I need to say something," he began, leaning against the edge of the counter. "I was wrong. Back when I doubted you. Back when I thought you might be part of the problem. I let my fear make me question the one person who's been fighting for them, fighting for us, from the start." Maris met his gaze, searching for the cracks that used to be there. She didn't find them this time. "I'm not perfect," he continued, "but I will never let that happen again. You have my word." She'd heard promises before, the kind that vanished as soon as they became inconvenient. But something about his voice, steady, unhurried, made her believe him. The next afternoon, she found the boys in the sunroom, a tangle of markers, crayons, and paper spread across the table. Finn waved her over. "We're making something for you." Rowan turned his paper around. It was a drawing of the 5 of them, Nathaniel, Maris, and the 3 boys, standing hand in hand by the Charles River. The skyline stretched behind them, and above, Calder had drawn a sun big enough to touch all their heads. "This time we put you in it," Calder said matter-of-factly, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Maris stared at the little version of herself in the picture, her hand linked to Nathaniel's, her other hand holding Calder's. The river shimmered in marker blue, and everyone's faces had the same smile. She couldn't bring herself to speak right away. Instead, she traced the edge of the paper with her fingertips, letting the moment sink in. It wasn't just a drawing. It was their way of saying what they didn't always have words for. "You belong here." 1 year later, Hollowmere House felt like a different place. The long, echoing hallways were now filled with the everyday soundtrack of life, laughter drifting from the kitchen, the thud of sneakers on the back porch, the hum of conversation over shared meals. The backyard, once just a patch of uneven grass, had been transformed into a lively play area with swings, a treehouse, and a small garden the boys insisted on tending themselves. On a bright Saturday afternoon, the Crossfords and Maris stood at the center of it all, hosting the grand opening of the Haven at Hollowmere. It wasn't just an event. It was the beginning of something they'd built together. A community space for children who had lost a parent or guardian. A place to find comfort and support without feeling like charity cases. Local reporters milled around, snapping photos. But this time their cameras felt like witnesses to something genuine, not vultures circling for scandal. Families from the neighborhood came, carrying plates of cookies and stories to share. Volunteers from the school helped set up crafts for the kids. And in the middle of it all, Maris moved with a calm confidence, greeting guests, making introductions, and checking in on the boys every so often. At one point, she caught Lucas watching from a distance, leaning against the porch railing with a cup of coffee. He gave her a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement of how far things had come. Later in the afternoon, when the crowd began to thin, Nathaniel called everyone's attention. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice carrying over the chatter. He looked toward Maris, with that same steady gaze that had become familiar over the past year. He walked to her, reached into his pocket, and dropped to one knee, not in some grand, orchestrated spectacle, but with a sincerity that pulled the air still. The boys froze for half a heartbeat before Calder blurted, "Ask her already." Finn shouted, say yes," and Rowan, in his quiet way, just grinned from ear to ear. Nathaniel didn't look away from her. "Maris Hale, you've been more than a partner in this home. You've been the anchor we didn't know we needed. I don't want you to just live here. I want this to be your home in every way. Will you marry me?" The boys bounced on their toes, their voices overlapping. "Say yes. Say yes." Maris felt a lump rise in her throat. She'd spent so much of her life bracing for the moment someone would leave. Now here was someone asking her to stay, not just for a season, but for good. "Yes," she whispered, then steadier, "yes." The cheer that followed could have shaken the windows. Nathaniel stood, pulling her into a hug, and the boys piled in, their arms looping wherever they could find space. It was messy and warm and perfect. As the evening drew in, the guests departed, leaving the house with that satisfying kind of quiet that comes after a good gathering. Snow had started falling outside, soft and steady, blanketing the yard in white. Inside, Maris settled into the couch with the boys clustered around her, a worn storybook open on her lap. She read aloud, her voice weaving through the room while Nathaniel moved between the kitchen and living room, setting mugs of hot cocoa on the table. Lucas, seated in the armchair, didn't say much, just smiled to himself like a man who'd seen storms pass and sun return. The fire crackled, the boys leaned against her, and Maris felt it fully. This was home. Not the kind you inherit, but the kind you choose and fight for. In her mind, she knew the truth she'd been chasing all along. Family isn't just born, it's built. And staying, truly staying, is the greatest gift you can give someone. When the last page of the story turned, the boys drifted upstairs one by one. Nathaniel kissed her temple as he passed, heading to lock up for the night. Maris walked to the front door to check the latch and saw a small envelope on the welcome mat. It was addressed simply, to Maris. She opened it right there in the quiet hallway. The handwriting was uneven, almost shaky. "I heard you can help. I don't know who else to trust." No signature. No return address. Just those words, heavy with the weight of another story waiting to be told. She stood there for a moment, the snow still falling beyond the glass, and felt the old familiar pull, not of running, but of stepping forward. Whatever came next, she was ready. In the end, it wasn't the battles in courtrooms or the storms in the media that defined this family. It was the choice to stay, even when leaving might have been easier. Hollowmere House became more than a home. It became proof that love is built through showing up again and again when it matters most. Maybe that's the real question for all of us. When the people we care about are in the middle of their storm, will we walk away or will we stay? If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next one.